Velthar 9 had watched civilizations rise and fall for 12,000 years. The Korathi observer had seen empires burn across 100 star systems. It had documented the death of species so ancient that their names had become legend. Nothing surprised Velthar 9 anymore. Nothing could. And then, the Korathi High Council assigned it to observe humanity. The assignment came with a note that said this was a simple task. Humans were a young species. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 60 years ago. They came from a small blue world orbiting an ordinary yellow star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. They were soft. They were fragile. They lived for less than a century. They had no natural weapons, no claws, no armor, no venom. Their bodies were weak and easily damaged. Velthar 9 accepted the assignment without complaint. After 12,000 years, even boring work was still work. The observer positioned itself at the edge of human space and began to watch. It watched their ships, small, simple vessels that looked like toys compared to the great warships of the Kethari or the hive carriers of the Vryn. It watched their colonies, scattered settlements on rocky worlds that other species had rejected as worthless. It watched their people, strange creatures who walked on two legs and covered their bodies with fabric and spent enormous amounts of time simply talking to each other. The first major event in the Observer's report came when humanity sent a delegation to the Galactic Concord. The Concord was the closest thing the galaxy had to a government. It was a gathering of the 12 most powerful species, each one ancient and terrible in its own way. The Vryn had conquered 1,000 worlds with their endless swarms. The Kethari stood 3 meters tall and could crush stone with their bare hands. The Mordal were beings of living crystal, who had existed since before most stars were born. Into this gathering of giants walked the human delegation. Their leader was a man named Daniel Price. He was 52 years old, which meant he had already lived more than half his natural life. He was small, barely reaching the chest of an average Kethari. He had no claws, no fangs, no natural armor. He wore a simple dark suit and carried no weapons, and he was smiling. Velthar 9 found this confusing. The observer had seen many species make first contact with the Concord. Most came with armies at their backs. Some came trembling with fear. A few came with desperate pleas for protection. None of them came smiling. Ambassador Price approached the High Council and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect. The observer learned. Not submission. "Thank you for receiving us," Price said. His voice was warm. "Humanity is honored to meet the great peoples of the galaxy. We come seeking friendship and cooperation. We believe that together, we can build something wonderful." The Concord members looked at each other. High Counselor Zethrix of the Vryn made a sound that the observer's translation systems identified as amusement. "Friendship," Zethrix repeated. The word sounded strange coming from a being whose species communicated through chemical signals and had no concept of individual emotion. "You are a small species, human. What could you possibly offer the Concord?" Price's smile did not waver. "We offer ourselves. Our curiosity. Our creativity. Our willingness to help those in need. We don't have much. But what we have, we share freely." This answer seemed to confuse the council even more than the smile. Over the following months, Velthar 9 watched humanity establish itself in conquered space. They built a small embassy on the central station. They opened trade routes for goods that other species found: strange music, art, something called coffee, that humans seemed unable to function without. They hosted cultural events that they called movie nights, where they projected moving images on walls and provided something called popcorn. Other species attended these events out of curiosity. They left confused but somehow pleased. A young human officer named Katie Marshall was assigned to the embassy's community outreach program. Her job, as far as the observer could understand, was simply to be friendly. She learned the languages of other species. She memorized their customs. She taught alien children how to play human games, one involving a ball that had to be thrown through a metal ring, another involving running in circles while music played. The children loved her. Their parents were baffled. "Why does she do this?" A Kethari diplomat asked Ambassador Price one day. "What does she gain?" A Kethari diplomat asks, A Cathari diplomat, Price considered the question. Joy, he said finally. She gains joy from seeing others happy. The Cathari stared at him for a long moment, then walked away without another word. Velthar 9 recorded incident after incident of this strange behavior. When a Mordal freighter suffered engine failure near human space, it was a human rescue ship that arrived first. The humans risked their own vessel to save the Mordal crew, refusing any payment or reward. When famine struck a Cathari colony due to crop failure, human cargo ships arrived with food supplies before the Cathari government had even finished writing their request for aid. Why do they do this? High Counselor Zethrix asked during a private council session. What is their strategy? Perhaps they have no strategy, suggested Elder Mordal Prime. Perhaps they are simply foolish. No species is this foolish, Zethrix replied. But months passed, and years, and humanity asked for nothing. They traded fairly. They helped freely. They smiled constantly. They seemed genuinely happy just to be part of the galactic community. The Concord eventually stopped trying to understand them. Humanity was classified as a minor species, friendly but irrelevant, kind but weak. They posed no threat. They offered no challenge. They were simply there, like background noise, always smiling, always helping, always gentle. They will not survive long, Zethrix told the council. The galaxy is not kind to soft species. Something will come along and crush them, and they will be forgotten like all the others. The other council members agreed. History had proven this truth countless times. Gentle species did not last. The universe belonged to the strong, the ruthless, the willing to do whatever was necessary to survive. Velthar 9 added this assessment to its report. The observer marked humanity as non-threatening and minimal strategic importance. The observation mission was downgraded to low priority. The Korathi High Council reassigned most of the observation resources to more important targets. This was a mistake. Velthar 9 would later calculate that this assessment was the most catastrophically wrong evaluation in the entire 12,000-year history of Korathi observation. The observer had watched humanity at peace. It had seen their kindness, their gentleness, their endless capacity for friendship and cooperation. It had not yet seen what humanity became when that peace was shattered. That lesson was coming, and when it arrived, it would teach the entire galaxy why the soft species from the small blue world should never, ever be underestimated. 18 years passed. Velthar 9 continued its observation of humanity. Though with minimal attention, the species remained exactly as it had been, friendly, helpful, gentle. They expanded slowly, building new colonies on worlds that other species did not want. They improved their technology gradually, never seeking weapons of war, only better tools for exploration and medicine and communication. And then, the dominion of Zalthrek came. They emerged from the dark space beyond the galactic rim, a region so empty and cold that no species had bothered to map it. The first sign of their arrival was the silence of 3 Vryn outpost stations. One day the stations were there, sending regular reports. The next day they were gone. Not destroyed. Not conquered. Simply erased. The Vryn sent a fleet to investigate. The fleet never returned. Within 1 standard month, the galaxy learned what the Exalthrek were. They were conquerors. Their bodies were built for war, covered in natural armor, harder than steel, equipped with claws that could tear through metal, possessing redundant organs that allowed them to survive injuries that would kill any other species. They did not think as individuals. They shared a hive mind that connected millions of warriors into a single vast intelligence, processing tactical data faster than any computer, coordinating attacks with perfect precision. They had burned their way through 17 civilizations in the void beyond the rim. Now they had found new prey. The Vryn fell first. Their hive worlds, which had stood for 10,000 years, were reduced to ash in 3 standard weeks. The endless swarms that had conquered 1,000 worlds meant nothing against an enemy that could predict their every movement, counter their every strategy, adapt to their every tactic. The Cathari fought bravely. Their warriors were the strongest in the known galaxy, capable of crushing stone and bending metal with their bare hands. The Zalthrek simply overwhelmed them with numbers. For every Zalthrek warrior the Cathari killed, 10 more took its place. The Cathari homeworld fell in 40 days. Those who survived surrendered. The Mordal did not fight at all. They were beings of crystal and light, ancient beyond measure but fragile in their own way. When the Zalthrek came, the Mordal simply vanished. Entire populations, millions of crystal beings who had existed since before the stars were young, atomized themselves rather than submit. The Galactic Concord, which had stood for 8,000 years, shattered like glass. Species that had once considered themselves mighty fled into the darkness between stars. Species that had once considered themselves proud bent their knees and accepted slavery. The galaxy burned, and no one seemed able to stop it. The Zalthrek barely noticed humanity. The soft species was small, weak, irrelevant. They would be dealt with eventually. Like all the others, there was no rush. But then a Zalthrek war fleet intercepted a human vessel near the Kepler 442 system. The ship was called the Homeward Star. It was a colony transport, a large, slow, unarmed vessel designed to carry civilians to new settlement worlds. Aboard were 12,000 humans, families, children, elderly, workers and teachers, and doctors and farmers. They were not soldiers. They were not warriors. They were simply people looking for a new home. The Zalthrek war fleet consisted of 40 warships. Their commander, a hive mind node designated Zalthrek 7742, calculated that the transport would make an excellent source of biological material for the Dominion's processing facilities. The commander broadcast a simple message on all frequencies: submit or be harvested. Velthar 9, monitoring from a safe distance, expected the humans to surrender. What else could they do? They were unarmed civilians, facing a fleet that had crushed the mightiest empires in the galaxy. Surrender was logical. Surrender was survival. But there was another ship present, a small escort frigate named the USS Defiance. It was barely 1/10 the size of the smallest Zalthrek cruiser. Its weapons were designed for fighting pirates and small raiders, not warships. Its crew numbered 180. Its captain was a man named Nathan Cole. Captain Cole was 44 years old. He had a wife on Earth and 2 children who sent him video messages every week. He had joined the human fleet because he believed in protecting people, not because he wanted to fight wars. He had never fired a weapon in anger in his entire career. When the Zalthrek demanded surrender, Captain Cole moved his small frigate between the war fleet and the transport ship. "Negative," he responded. His voice was calm and steady. "You will not touch them." The Zalthrek were confused. The hive mind processed this response through 700,000 connected nodes and could not understand it. One small ship against 40 warships? The human was clearly malfunctioning. Perhaps their species was even weaker than originally assessed, so weak that they could not even recognize certain death when it stood before them. Zalthrek 774-2 broadcast again. "You are one vessel. We are 40. You cannot win." Captain Cole's response was simple: "I know." Then he ordered his crew to attack. The USS Defiance lasted 7 minutes. In those 7 minutes, Captain Cole and his crew fought with a fury that the Zalthrek had never encountered. They flew their small ship directly into the heart of the enemy fleet, dodging fire that should have destroyed them instantly, finding gaps in formations that should have had no gaps. They destroyed 3 Zalthrek cruisers. They crippled 2 more. They created enough chaos and confusion that the Homeward Star had time to power up its faster-than-light engines and escape. The hive mind could not understand what was happening. No species fought like this. No species sacrificed themselves so willingly, so completely. For others, it was inefficient. It was illogical. It was impossible. And yet the humans did it anyway. When the USS Defiance finally broke apart under the concentrated fire of 37 warships, Captain Cole was still alive. His ship was burning around him. His crew was dead or dying. He had minutes to live, perhaps less. He used those minutes to send one final transmission. "This is Captain Nathan Cole of the USS Defiance to Earth Command. The homeward star is safe. The civilians are safe. 12,000 people will live because we held the line. Do not mourn us. Do not forget us. Tell Earth what happened here. Tell them what these creatures did. And tell them. His voice broke for just a moment, then steadied. Tell them we were not afraid. Quote, the transmission ended. The USS Defiance exploded. 180 humans died in the void between stars, buying time for 12,000 strangers to escape. Velthar 9 recorded everything. The observer expected this to be a minor incident, a footnote in the long history of the Zalthrek conquest. One small ship, one small crew, one small sacrifice. It would be forgotten in days. The observer was wrong. When the transmission reached Earth, something changed. Velthar 9 watched the human networks and communication channels and saw the change happen in real time. The soft species, the gentle, smiling, helpful species that had been dismissed as irrelevant stopped smiling. The observer had seen many species respond to tragedy. Most wept and surrendered. Some fled and hid. A few fought brief, hopeless battles before accepting their fate. Humanity did none of these things. Instead, across every human world and every human ship and every human station, a single phrase began to spread. Velthar 9 heard it whispered in corridors and shouted in assemblies and written on walls. Remember the Defiance. The soft species was awakening, and the galaxy was about to learn why that should terrify everyone. Velthar 9 had observed many species prepare for war. The process was usually slow and filled with debate. Politicians argued about costs, generals argued about strategies, citizens protested and complained and demanded peace. By the time most species actually mobilized for conflict, their enemies had already won half the war. Humanity mobilized in 72 hours. Every human ambassador in the galaxy recalled themselves from their posts. The friendly embassies closed. The cultural exchanges stopped. The movie nights ended. The smiles disappeared from human faces as if they had never existed. On Earth, the planetary government called an emergency session of the United Earth Assembly. Representatives from every nation and colony gathered in a vast hall that had been built for peaceful debate and diplomatic discussion. There was no debate now. There was no discussion. A general named Scott Harrison walked to the central podium. He was 61 years old, a veteran of small conflicts and peacekeeping missions who had spent most of his career hoping he would never have to fight a real war. Now that war had come to him. You have all seen the transmission from Captain Cole, Harrison said. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the hall. You know what the Zalthrek did. You know what they intend to do to every human colony, every human city, every human child. He paused. The Galactic Concord has fallen. The great powers of the galaxy have surrendered or fled. We stand alone. Someone in the assembly shouted. Then what can we do? We are small. We are weak. We cannot fight them. Harrison looked at the speaker without anger. You are right, he said. We are small. We have been at peace for generations. We have built hospitals instead of warships, schools instead of fortresses, gardens instead of weapons factories. We have chosen kindness over strength, cooperation over conquest. His voice hardened. And now creatures from the darkness between stars have decided that our kindness makes us prey. He straightened his shoulders. They think we are soft because we chose peace. They believe we are weak because we do not enjoy violence. They look at our smiles and see submission. His eyes swept across the assembly. They are wrong. We chose peace not because we cannot fight, but because we know what we become when we choose war. We chose peace because war is terrible, and we wanted to spare the galaxy that terror. Harrison's voice rose. But our people have been killed. Our children have been threatened. Our kindness has been repaid with murder. He slammed his hand on the podium. So now we choose war. And God help anyone who stands in our way. The assembly voted unanimously for total mobilization. Velthar 9 watched the transformation happen across human space. Factories that had produced medical equipment and consumer goods stopped their normal operations. Within days, they were producing weapons, armor, ammunition, and war machines. Shipyards that had spent decades building exploration vessels and colony transports began constructing warships fast. Heavily armed vessels designed for one purpose only. Scientists who had devoted their lives to curing diseases turned their brilliant minds to creating new weapons. Engineers who had built bridges and power plants started designing shields and targeting systems. Teachers told their students about Captain Cole and the USS Defiance, and children who had grown up in peace began to understand what sacrifice meant. But what struck Velthar 9 most was not the military buildup. Other species had done the same thing when facing the Zalthrek. The Vryn had built fleets. The Kethari had mobilized their warriors. They had all failed. What struck the observer was how humans dealt with their fear. A young engineer named Megan Torres worked at a weapons development facility in orbit around Mars. She was 28 years old and had never seen combat. Before the war, she had designed navigation systems for cargo ships. Now she was helping to create a new type of missile designed to penetrate Xalthrek armor. Velthar 9 observed her through security cameras, working 20-hour shifts, barely eating, never sleeping for more than a few hours at a time. One night, she sat in the facility's break room with a colleague named Derek Sims, both of them exhausted beyond words. "I'm terrified," Megan said quietly. Her hands were shaking. "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see their ships. I see what they did to the Vryn worlds. I see them coming for Earth." Derek nodded slowly. "Me too." There was a long silence. Then Megan stood up. "Break's over. We need to finish the targeting software." They went back to work. This was the moment Velthar 9 began to truly understand humanity. The observer had seen brave species before, species that felt no fear, species that were too stupid to recognize danger, species that had been bred for war and knew nothing else. Those species were dangerous but predictable. Humans were different. They felt fear as deeply as any species in the galaxy. They understood exactly how terrible the Xalthrek were. They knew they might lose. They knew they might die. They knew their entire civilization might be erased from existence, and they chose to fight anyway. Fear did not paralyze them. It sharpened them. Every nightmare, every moment of terror, every thought of what they might lose, all of it became fuel for their determination. They were afraid, and they kept working. They were afraid, and they kept building. They were afraid, and they kept preparing for the storm they knew was coming. Across human space, similar scenes played out millions of times. Parents kissed their children goodbye and went to work in weapons factories. Young people who had planned careers as artists and musicians enlisted in the military. Elderly veterans who had not held weapons in decades volunteered to train the next generation. A retired admiral named Lauren Beck received a message from Earth Command asking if she would return to service. She was 63 years old and had spent the past 7 years gardening and spending time with her grandchildren. She had earned her peace. She replied in 4 words, "When do I start?" When asked later why she had given up her peaceful retirement, Admiral Beck said simply, "My grandchildren deserve to see stars that aren't burning." Well, the galaxy watched humanity prepare for war and saw nothing to fear. Yes, the humans were building ships. Yes, they were manufacturing weapons. But they were still small. They were still young. They had never fought a war on this scale. The Zalthrek had destroyed civilizations that had been waging war for 10,000 years. The Galactic Concord, what remained of it, sent a message to Earth advising surrender. "You cannot win," the message said. "The Dominion has never been defeated. Save your people. Accept their terms." Earth's response came from General Harrison. "We have considered your advice. We have declined to follow it. Humanity will not kneel." Velthar 9 recorded this exchange and added it to the growing file on human behavior. The observer noted that this response was irrational. The humans had no chance of victory. Every calculation, every simulation, every historical precedent said they would lose. But the observer was beginning to suspect that calculations and simulations and historical precedents might not apply to this strange species. Humanity was not fighting because they believed they could win. They were fighting because they could not bear the alternative. They were fighting because somewhere in the void between stars, 180 people had given their lives for 12,000 strangers. They were fighting because Captain Nathan Cole had said, "You will not touch them," and meant it with every fiber of his being. They were fighting because they had built a civilization on kindness and cooperation and love. And they refused to let that civilization die without the greatest struggle in human history. The storm was coming, and for the first time in its 12,000-year existence, Velthar 9 found itself hoping that somehow, against all odds, the soft species might survive it. The Zalthrek Dominion had conquered 47 species. They had fought wars across thousands of star systems for millions of years. Their hive mind contained the tactical knowledge of every battle ever fought by their kind. They had never lost a war. They had never even come close to losing a war. Their commanders calculated that humanity would fall in 6 standard weeks. The Battle of Proxima Centauri began on the 203rd day after Captain Cole's sacrifice. The Zalthrek sent a fleet of 800 warships, enough firepower to destroy a dozen civilizations. They expected the humans to run or surrender or die quickly. Instead, they found Admiral Lauren Beck waiting for them. The human fleet was smaller than the Zalthrek force, only 300 ships, many of them converted civilian vessels, hastily armed with whatever weapons could be fitted to their hulls. Admiral Beck commanded from the carrier USS Valor, a ship that had been a luxury cruise liner before the war. Now its observation decks were filled with fighter bays, and its swimming pools had been converted to ammunition storage. "All ships, this is Admiral Beck," she broadcast to her fleet. "The enemy thinks we are weak. They think we will break. They are wrong." Her voice was calm and steady, the voice of a grandmother who had faced worse things than alien warships. "Today we show them what humanity is made of. Today we fight for everyone who cannot fight for themselves. Today we remember the defiance." The battle began. The Xalthrek expected the humans to form defensive lines, to try to hold positions, to fight the kind of organized battle that the hive mind could easily counter. Instead, the human fleet scattered like leaves in a storm, breaking into dozens of small groups that attacked from every direction at once. Human pilots flew their fighters directly at Zalthrek carriers, launching missiles at point-blank range before breaking away. Human destroyers appeared out of nowhere, struck hard, and vanished before the enemy could respond. Human soldiers boarded enemy ships and fought hand-to-hand in corridors designed for creatures twice their size. The hive mind was confused. This was not how wars were fought. This was chaos. This was madness. This was humanity. The battle lasted not 6 weeks but 9 months. Every day, the Zalthrek expected the humans to collapse. Every day, the humans kept fighting. When they lost a ship, the survivors transferred to other vessels and kept fighting. When they ran out of missiles, they rammed their ships into enemy vessels. When their weapons failed, they fought with knives and bare hands. A Marine unit led by Sergeant Kyle Bennett was assigned to hold a mining station near the front lines. The station was not strategically important, just a small facility on a barren moon. But 2 million civilians were evacuating through that sector, and they needed time. "Hold this station for 4 days, Bennett's commanders told him. 4 days, and the civilians will be safe. Kyle Bennett looked at his 300 Marines, young men and women who had been factory workers and students and shop clerks before the war. Most of them had never fired a weapon in anger before 6 months ago. "Yes, sir," he said. The Zalthrek attacked on the second day. They sent 5,000 warriors against 300 humans. The hive mind calculated that the station would fall in 2 hours. It did not fall in 2 hours. It did not fall in 2 days. The Marines held their positions, fighting from room to room, corridor to corridor, turning every doorway into a fortress and every hallway into a killing ground. When they ran out of ammunition, they used the enemy's weapons. When those ran out, they used mining equipment, picks and drills, and cutting torches. On the 15th day, human reinforcements finally arrived. They found 11 Marines still alive, still holding the central command center of the station. The walls were scorched black. The floors were covered with the bodies of Zalthrek warriors. Sergeant Bennett was sitting against a wall, missing an arm, barely conscious. "Did the civilians make it?" he asked. They had. 2 million people had escaped because 300 humans had refused to retreat. Across the war, similar stories repeated themselves. Humans did not fight like other species. They did not calculate the odds and withdraw when defeat seemed likely. They did not surrender when their positions became hopeless. They fought and died and fought some more, buying time with their lives for people they would never meet. The hive mind could not understand it. Every tactical model, every strategic calculation, every prediction, all of them failed against this enemy. The humans were weaker. The humans were fewer. The humans were dying by the millions, and yet they kept advancing. "They will not stop," the hive commanders reported to the Dominion's central consciousness. "We destroy their ships, and they build more. We kill their soldiers, and more appear. We take their worlds, and they fight for every building, every street, every room. They are wounded. They are bleeding. They are dying. And they keep advancing." The Zalthrek began to feel something they had never felt in millions of years of conquest. They began to feel afraid. In the human fleet, a pilot named Ryan Torres prepared for what he knew would be his final mission. He was Megan Torres's younger brother, the engineer who had helped design the very missiles his fighter carried. He had joined the military 3 days after the attack on the Homeward Star. He had flown 47 combat missions. He had been shot down twice, and survived both times. Today, intelligence had located a Zalthrek command vessel, a massive ship that housed one of the hive mind's primary nodes. Destroying it would disrupt enemy coordination across an entire sector. But the ship was heavily defended. The attack would almost certainly be a one-way mission. Ryan volunteered immediately. As his fighter approached the enemy fleet, he broadcast on an open channel so that both sides could hear him. "This is for everyone on the Homeward Star," he said. "This is for Katie Marshall and the children she taught to play. This is for Captain Nathan Cole and the crew of the Defiance." His voice was steady, without fear. "This is for my sister Megan, who is probably working right now on some new weapon that will help us win this war. This is for every human who ever looked up at the stars and dreamed." His fighter struck the command vessel at full speed. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. The hive node was destroyed. The humans named a medal after Ryan Torres. They gave one to his sister Megan, who accepted it with tears streaming down her face. Then went back to work designing weapons. Velthar 9 watched all of this and struggled to process what it was seeing. The Observer had documented countless wars. It had seen species fight with courage and determination. It had seen species sacrifice themselves for their people, but it had never seen anything like humanity. They did not fight despite their fear, they fought through it. They did not sacrifice themselves because they did not value their lives, they sacrificed themselves because they valued other lives more. Every death was mourned. Every name was remembered. Every fallen soldier became fuel for the survivors' determination. The humans carried their dead with them, not as weight, but as strength. And slowly, impossibly, they began to win. The Zalthrek fell back from Proxima Centauri. They fell back from a dozen other systems. Their fleets, which had never known retreat, began to withdraw. Their warriors, who had never known fear, began to hesitate. The soft species was not soft anymore. The gentle civilization had become something terrible. The smiling, helpful people who had hosted movie nights and taught alien children to play games had transformed into warriors who would not stop, could not stop, refused to stop until the threat to their children was ended forever. The storm had come for humanity. And humanity had become the storm. The war lasted 4 years, 2 months, and 17 days. When it ended, the Zalthrek Dominion, which had conquered 47 species across millions of years, controlled nothing but their own home system. Their great fleets were shattered, their warrior populations were decimated. Their hive mind, which had once connected billions of individuals into a single vast intelligence, was fragmented and broken. and standing before their final stronghold was the human fleet. Humanity had paid a terrible price for this moment. Over 80 million soldiers had died. 16,000 ships had been destroyed. 3 colony worlds had been lost completely, their populations either killed or evacuated. The survivors carried wounds, physical and emotional, that would never fully heal. Admiral Lauren Beck, now 67 years old, commanded the final assault from the bridge of the USS Valor. The ship had been repaired and rebuilt so many times that almost nothing remained of the original vessel. But the name remained. The spirit remained. Her fleet surrounded the Zalthrek home system. One final push, and the enemy would be destroyed completely. One final battle, and humanity would have its revenge for every colony burned, every ship destroyed, every life taken. Admiral Beck looked at the tactical display showing the enemy's remaining forces. They were beaten. They knew they were beaten. For the first time in their species' existence, the Zalthrek faced extinction. "Open a channel to the enemy," Beck ordered. Her communications officer hesitated. "Ma'am?" "They've never responded to any communication attempt during the entire war." "Open the channel." The channel opened. Admiral Beck spoke clearly, knowing that the hive mind would hear and understand every word. "This is Admiral Lauren Beck of the United Earth Fleet, to the Zalthrek Dominion. You have lost this war. Your fleets are destroyed. Your warriors are dead. You have nothing left but your home system and a handful of damaged ships." She paused. "You can end this. Withdraw your remaining forces beyond the galactic rim. Return to the void you came from. Never enter this region of space again. Do this, and your species survives." There was silence. The hive mind processed her words through what remained of its consciousness. Surrender was not a concept the Zalthrek understood. They had never surrendered. They had never needed to, but they had also never faced an enemy like humanity. For 17 long minutes, the galaxy held its breath. Then the Zalthrek fleet began to move not toward the human ships, but away from them, slowly, one by one. The remaining Zalthrek vessels turned and headed for the darkness beyond the galactic rim. They did not surrender. Their hive mind was incapable of that concept. But they chose not to fight. For the first time in their existence, they chose to retreat. The war was over. Velthar 9 observed the human fleet in the hours after the enemy withdrawal. The observer expected celebrations, cheering, singing, the release of tension that usually followed victory. Some species became drunk with triumph after winning wars. Others fell into exhausted relief. Humanity did neither. Instead, the humans gathered in small groups and spoke quietly about those who had not survived. They shared stories about friends who had died, about sacrifice and courage and loss. They wept for the dead even as they celebrated survival. Admiral Beck stood alone on the observation deck of her ship, looking out at the stars, and cried for the first time in 4 years. Then they went home, and Velthar 9 watched humanity do something that terrified the observer more than any battle it had witnessed during the war. They rebuilt. The factories that had produced weapons began producing medicine and building materials again. The shipyards that had constructed warships started building colony vessels and exploration craft. The children who had grown up learning about sacrifice and war were taught about peace and cooperation and kindness. Humanity did not become a warrior species. They did not embrace their newfound power and set out to conquer the galaxy as so many other victorious civilizations had done. They did not seek revenge against the species that had abandoned them or mocked them before the war. Instead, they went back to being exactly what they had been before, a friendly, helpful, gentle species that wanted nothing more than to explore the stars and make friends with everyone they met. Admiral Beck retired for the second time. She returned to her home on Earth, to her garden and her grandchildren. A photographer captured an image of her pushing her granddaughter on a swing in a park near her house. She was smiling, the same warm, genuine smile that humans had always worn. Ambassador Daniel Price returned to the Galactic Concord. The organization had been destroyed during the war, but now it was being rebuilt. The surviving species gathered once again to discuss trade and cooperation and the future of the galaxy. The other species looked at the human ambassador differently now. They remembered how they had dismissed humanity as weak and irrelevant. They remembered how they had predicted the soft species would be crushed in weeks. They remembered how they had fled and surrendered, while humans stood and fought. They did not look at humanity with pity anymore. They did not look at them with amusement. They looked at them with fear. Ambassador Price noticed this fear and addressed it directly. "We are still who we were," he told the assembled representatives. "We still want peace. We still want friendship. We still want to host movie nights and teach your children games and help when you need us." He paused, and his gentle smile faded just slightly. "But now you know what we are capable of when peace is not an option." The assembly was silent. Price's smile returned. "So let's make sure peace is always an option, shall we? Who wants popcorn?" Velthar 9 completed its final assessment report on humanity. The observer had lived for 12,000 years and documented the rise and fall of countless civilizations. It had seen species born and species die. It had watched empires spread across the stars and crumble into dust. None of that had prepared the Korathi for humanity. The report was long and detailed, filled with observations and analysis and data, but at the end, Velthar 9 added a single recommendation, something the observer had never done before in 12,000 years of service. Do not threaten humanity. Do not harm their children. Do not mistake their kindness for weakness. They are not a warrior species. They are something far more dangerous. They are a species that chooses peace until peace is no longer possible, and then becomes war itself. The universe should not fear humanity because they are strong. The universe should fear humanity because they decide to be strong. They could conquer the galaxy if they wished. They choose not to. They could destroy any species that threatens them. They prefer to make friends instead. But threaten what they love. Truly threaten it. And there is no force in existence that can stop them. Velthar 9 transmitted the report and requested reassignment. The observer had seen enough. Years later, on a rebuilt Concord station far from Earth, an old woman named Katie Marshall returned to work. She had spent the war years helping to evacuate civilians from threatened worlds. She had never fired a weapon or piloted a warship. She had simply done what she had always done, helped people, cared for children, spread kindness wherever she went. Now she was teaching again. Alien children from a dozen species gathered in her classroom to learn about human culture and play human games. She taught them the same things she had taught before the war: how to throw a ball through a ring, how to run in circles while music played, how to laugh and share and be friends. One day, a young Vryn child asked her about the war. The child was too young to remember the conflict, but had heard stories from its parents. "Were you scared?" the child asked. Katie smiled, the same warm smile that other species had once mistaken for weakness, the same smile that had survived 4 years of terrible war. "Every day," she said. "I was scared every single day." The child thought about this. "Then how did you keep going?" "Because being brave doesn't mean you aren't scared," Katie explained. "Being brave means you're scared, and you keep going anyway. You keep helping people. You keep protecting the ones you love. You keep being kind, even when kindness is hard." The child considered this for a long moment. Then it asked the question that had haunted the galaxy since the war ended. "Is that why the universe fears humans?" Katie Marshall looked out the viewport at the stars, the same stars that humanity had fought and bled and died to protect. She thought about Captain Nathan Cole and the crew of the Defiance. She thought about Admiral Beck and her grandchildren. She thought about Sergeant Kyle Bennett and his 11 surviving Marines. She thought about Ryan Torres and his final message. She thought about all the humans who had given everything so that children like this one could ask innocent questions in peaceful classrooms. "No," she said finally. "The universe fears humans because when we love something, truly love it, there is nothing in existence that can stop us from protecting it. Not fear. Not pain. Not death itself. We are small and soft, and we live short lives. But we love so deeply, so completely, that we become unstoppable." She picked up a ball and smiled at her students. "Now, who wants to play?" The children cheered and gathered around her. And in that moment, on that station, among the stars, The universe saw what humanity had always been. Not warriors, not conquerors, not monsters, but simply people who loved, and who would do anything to protect that love. The soft species had won the greatest war in galactic history, and then they went back to playing games with children, because that was who they truly were.